Okay, we're going live in 3. And if anyone has any anxiety about what's going to happen, just relax. It's as if we were together and we're just talking, and the authenticity will flow through. Sunday afternoon.
Monday morning.
Monday morning in Australia.
In 3 minutes, it's Monday morning in Australia.
Wow. Charles, you've collected quite an international collective here.
The trip across the canopy. Gary, we've got to be international, because otherwise people say, oh, you people in the UK, you're doing this. It's an international problem. It needs an international solution. And that's why we've worked so hard to get this amazing international group. This is the 1 hour. This is the magic hour when we can both have Alvin in Sydney and Mark in Portland, Oregon.
I think you should say that when we go live. That's quite special.
I'll see if I can. It is special, yeah. I'm going to start off with the first question, just for a short answer to everybody about how they see the threat. So if you can just think about that one, that what do you think, to set the scene, how serious a problem is global warming? Because all this IPCC stuff, it's all a sort of a bit theoretical and a bit academic, and so I think we've got to really sort of bring it home to people. And I don't know if you've seen it, but I've just been watching the John Kerry interview at Kew Gardens on I think it was the 20th of July. It was so good. So do we have to start, Gary?
We're going to do a countdown. Are you ready, everybody?
Get the right lighting.
All right. Certainly my intention for this is we're going to change the world together. So here we go. 3, 2, 1. We're live. We're live on Facebook and YouTube. If you're watching, the intention is to change the world for a better place for the generations that are going to come forward. Charles, over to you, sir.
Hello. Thank you for joining us. A big welcome to everybody. So this webinar, how to get 1.5 degrees max agreed at COP26. Now, for some of you who might have been following us, we started this series of webinars about 1.5 back in January. So this is actually the 8th one of these webinars that we've had. And at the first one, Gary, if you remember, we talked about how important it was and that we wanted 1.5 degrees. Now, at that time back in January, Joe Biden had only just come in. The US had survived the attack on Congress, or whatever happened. And so where we are now, we've just got about 2 months, just over 2 months to go before COP26, which is the opportunity for world leaders to commit to 1.5 degrees or not. Okay, so that's what the wonderful team we have here is assembled to talk about. So thank you very much to you all for joining us. So as Gary says, we're incredibly international. So this is the magic hour when we can get Alvin Stone from Sydney, where it's 7 a.m., Mark Trexler from Portland, Oregon. Oh, sorry, no, Alvin, it's midnight in Australia, where Alvin is. It's 7 a.m. in Portland, Oregon, where Mark is. And of course, we're at normal time here in the UK, where we've got Alistair Mullen in Stafford, and Georgia, you're somewhere near London, yeah?
Yeah, North London.
Super, right, great. So look, myself, my name's Charles Appleby. I'm the founder of NoCO2.org. So many people are wondering what to do about global warming, and we make it really, really easy for people by planting trees. Plant lots of trees and you can remove your carbon footprint. So to date, we've planted 453,000 trees now, and planting those trees has created over 4,500 days of paid work for people and families in extreme poverty. This webinar and the activity of everybody here is all voluntary. It's sponsored by NoCO2. So all we'd ask for people, if you would like to make a contribution, then for £20, we will plant 180 trees for you. And for £30, we'll plant 270 trees. Okay, so that's me. First, big thank you to Gary Kasulu of Loving Social Media and his team who've helped make this possible with the technology. So thanks for that, Gary. And then over to our wonderful team to introduce themselves. So Georgia, would you like to make a start?
Hi, thank you. Wow. So I'm first out of the gate. So yeah, my name's Georgia Elliot Smith. I am Managing Director of Sustainability Consultancy Element 4. I am an environmental engineer in industry and have been for 25 years working in the construction sector. I'm also a legal activist, an environmental activist. I'm currently taking the UK government to court over climate change and climate ambition. I'm formerly UNESCO Special Junior Envoy for Youth and the Environment, which is a role I continue today by speaking to lots of young people and activists around the world on how they can smash down walls and start making a noise and being really proactive on environmental activism. And finally, I'm also on the steering committee for She Changes Climate, which is a campaign to achieve gender parity at the top table of senior climate negotiations. So a few fingers and a few pies.
Wow, amazing. So I hope you've listened to the replay of our young people last month on the 15th of July, Georgia, because we had 5 amazing young people who are going to really blow the world apart with their advocacy. So Alistair, over to you.
Yeah, it's difficult to follow that one. I'm actually working with the UK government, not taking them to court, but if they don't do what I'd asked them to do, I might be taking them to court. So my name's Alistair Mullen. I have a capital markets background, so I've been in finance for the last 30 years. Everything I look at, I try and look at it from how can capital markets be part and be a big part of the solution. My background really has been, certainly in finance, has been defined by crisis. And I say that positively, and I've been pretty much at the forefront of every major crisis providing solutions for. So that was some long-term capital problems in 1997, went out to Asia to run a distressed Asian desk in 98 for the Asia crisis, came back and set up credit markets and actually sort of helped cause some of the problems that blew up the world and learned from that. And I was involved in the restructuring of the euro debts as the euro went into crisis. So what I'm trying to do is bring all those skills of actually trying to provide solutions for crisis and put that into the carbon markets. My background in carbon, I had my first investment. I set up a business for geo installation business for solar and ground source heat pumps 20 years ago. That's still standing. It's saved millions of tons of CO2 going into from the UK into the world. I traded carbon for a leading biofuel company and had my eyes opened as to the threats and opportunities with carbon markets there. And I've got 2 businesses at the moment. One is called Fund Nature, and it's looking at innovative solutions. Actually, we've got a mandate into COP26. We're working with one of the big 4 accountancy firms and basically the Rainforest Coalition to save the rainforests. And I also have a UK business to put basically up to 500,000 kilometres of hedge road back into the UK. That's me.
Super. Thank you, Alistair. That's amazing. Alvin, over to you, sir.
Hi, look, my background's fairly diverse. I probably should start when I was an editor of newspapers. I've worked for 2 of the largest newspaper groups in Australia. And when I saw what's happening to newspapers, I left, and my first destination was WWF Australia, where I worked on a lot of their climate change work and also was their Western Australia manager. When I finished with them, I moved across to a boutique agency which worked with major energy clients, a couple of international corporations and electricity generators and people who built that kind of generation, everything from renewables to old coal-fired power stations up to nuclear energy, so that's all kit and caboodle. And then for the past 10 years, I've worked with about 200 climate scientists across 5 universities in Australia. A lot of them have been lead authors on IPCC reports, and I've been involved in sort of doing the media and presenting the IPCC reports to Australian media and building coalitions in that area. So my background really is coming at climate change from all 3 angles, from the media, the advocacy, the industry, and now the straight science. So that's how I come to this.
Super. Thank you, Alvin. Mark, over to yourself.
Okay, thanks. So I started working at the World Resources Institute in Washington, D.C. in 1988. and did a lot of the early nature-based solutions work, including with the IPCC, and did a lot of the early carbon markets work, and then founded the first sort of US management consultancy focused on business climate risk in 1991, and continued with that for many years in different capacities. I'm now focused on sort of two ideas. One is approaching climate change as a knowledge management challenge in terms of the information exists to tackle climate change. It's just that no one actually ever sees the information they would use. And that's the climate web that we've built, and that's online open access at climateweb.com, theclimateweb.com. And also promoting the idea of climate chess. In other words, instead of just trying to build a million-piece jigsaw puzzle, how could we actually play a lot more strategically to tackle climate change?
Super. Okay. I'm glad you're back, Alistair, because I was going to ask you a question.
We had about 5 children in the house. They're all screaming. I just told them they can scream downstairs rather than upstairs.
Sure. Okay. So let's start off with this question, really, to help set the scene for those joining us. The been a lot of news about the IPCC paper in the last week, but it's quite high level. It's about the physical science rather than about the impact on people. So what I think would be good to start off with is let's just give a short answer, if you would, to this question. Make it people focused if you can. So how serious a problem is global warming? So Alistair, let's kick off with you. So how serious a problem is global warming?
I'll just be very quick. I mean, as you sort of distill, the IPCC is at 23,000 scientists that are coming together. So you've got pretty much a quorum there. And I think everybody, and I think seeing our American friends starting to pay a lot more attention to this, it was never in their backyard. And we've obviously got wildfires going through the whole of various states, and tragically. Even in Europe, we've had 50-degree temperatures or close on in Europe. So it really is starting to appear in backyards. And I say backyards, I mean developed backyards where it was never going to be a problem. So I think that for me it's becoming a problem for everybody. And I'll leave it there for now.
Okay. Georgia.
Well, I mean, for me, it's terrifying. I feel like there is such a, I feel like we have sleepwalked our way into this current situation. I feel like the impact, I think when we look across the world, and particularly through my campaign with She Changes Climate, the impact on women and children is disproportionate, and the impact on those who are trying to keep their families together, gather food. Young women are predominantly smallholders in the developing world and are really struggling with drought and high temperatures. And when we look at displacement of people, the struggle that we have, particularly at the moment with Brexit and this mentality of closing borders and protectionism, and I think it's a real worry, because as climate change continues to bite, there will be further displacement of people across the world, and I can only see that leading to conflict and further stress on resources. So to me, I find this really quite a frightening prospect, and it's something that we have to take urgent action on.
I think that's a really, really important point that you've picked up on here, that this relationship between displacement leading almost inevitably to conflict. Yeah, so thanks for putting that on the table. Alvin.
So I'm actually going to take the IPCC report as my basis, even though you said it's high level. We've got the fires at the moment in Greece and Turkey. We've just had California. We're seeing extreme temperatures in Spain. Australia had its own fires in 2019, 2020. All of these things were forecast by climate scientists, but they weren't supposed to happen yet. This is at 1.1 degree centigrade. Currently, under our current trends, we're between the highest emission scenario and the second highest emission scenario. We're on target for around 4. Now, 4 means that you can't live in the tropics in summer. The other thing that's kind of striking in the report is, and the droughts in those same places are going to be real issues into the future. I think the other thing that was quite surprising by this report, there's a current called the Atlantic Meridian Overturning circulation. Now, what that current does is it's hugely important for taking the warm atmosphere, or the warmth from the tropics, and taking it up to where you guys are in North America, in the northern parts of America, and particularly through Europe and the UK. It's slowing down. And one of the surprising things in the report was that they said it could conceivably stop within the next 80 years. Now, we weren't expecting something like that for 200 years. So this is really important. What this means is it will completely change the climate and the kind of weather that you guys experience, and with that, the crops, with that, the water that you expect. And then on top of that, you have to remember that IPCC reports are conservative. They have been consistently conservative on every single release. They actually say in this report that they don't include permafrost thaw, they don't include the burning of peat, they don't include the burning of forests. So these are all things that climate models don't include. So this adds to that conservatism of it. And I think the last thing I want people to kind of realize is I'm going to give you a sense of what 4 degrees means. So if we're 4 degrees hotter, I was saying that it was impossible for you to live in the tropics during summer. You would be just stuck inside. If you invert that and we were 5 degrees cooler, you would have a kilometre of ice over New York. That's the kind of difference it is. It sounds like a small number. It's a big number. And it's something that we really, really need to take into consideration, because it won't end the world. It will wipe out ecosystems, but it will certainly destroy our civilization, and the world will continue on regardless. This is not about the world as such. This is about us. And I think that's why it really matters.
Well, that's such a powerful argument that you're saying this was forecast, but not yet. And you're saying that the IPCC reports are conservative in the sense that they do not take into account permafrost melting, which a lot of us are aware is potentially a big tipping point for the climate. Okay, so Mark, over to yourself.
Well, rather than try and build more onto what Alvin's just said, let me come at this from a totally different direction and give a quote from Margaret Heffernan, which is one of my favorite climate change quotes, because it really illustrates why this is such a problem. And the quote is that in failing to address climate change, all the forces of willful blindness come together like synchronized swimmers in a spectacular water ballet. And that's just such a brilliant quote for why we're 30, 40, 50 years into this issue, and we haven't done much about it. And it suggests that going forward, it's going to continue to be very difficult to do anything really substantial about it. And so understanding the fundamental problem here that we have of human decision-making and psychology is critical if we're ever actually going to make progress.
Okay, well, great quote. I mean, I think myself, I really do feel we have the opportunity to make a difference with this, which is, why I've chosen this as a subject of the webinar. Let's just bring in here from the chat. Stefan Savarese is in Corsica, and he's saying that it's 40 degrees now in Corsica. And what he's saying is that basically on the most ambitious scenario, we can limit global warming to 1.5 at the end of the century, but in that scenario, it relies on global heating rising to maybe 1.6 degrees before coming back down. Okay, so the subject today is about how to get 1.5 and agreed at COP26. So let's straight away come to focus on this absolutely key question. So what's happened? Just to remind folks, particularly in the audience, is that the G7 leaders met in June in Cornwall, UK, and they committed to keep 1.5 degrees in reach. Okay, then late July, the G20 lower level meeting. This is a meeting of G20 climate and energy ministers, so it's not actually the leaders. They met in July and they did not agree this. You can see from the communique the meeting was somewhat chaotic. So next round is that the G20 heads of state meet on the 30th and 31st of October in Rome. And this is right up against the COP26 meeting in Glasgow, the 1st to the 12th of November. So these two meetings together are really the potential opportunity for world leaders to agree 1.5. So my question is, what actually is going to persuade world leaders to agree 1.5? So we ourselves may like issues like, you know, reputation, the reputation of the country, intergenerational fairness, moral responsibility, helping the world's poor, all these type of things. So they may persuade us, and they may persuade a lot of people out there and in our audience. But my question is, what actually are going to be the key issues that are going to persuade world leaders to agree 1.5 when it comes to the G20 meeting and the COP26? So Alistair, let's come to you first on this one, if we may.
Yeah, obviously a relatively easy question to nail in just a few seconds, right? Big question. I come at everything with basically trying to be a student of history and also markets. What are we talking? We've got a problem, and why have we got a problem? And there's one simple reason that we have a problem, and nobody ever actually defines where the problem came from. The problem has very simply come from not pricing the externality. So we haven't priced any pollution. So we can only get a resolution to the problem when we price the externality fully. So that is a complete change of everything that we've done in the last 70 years. It's a change of the business model. If you think of what has defined post-war era, it's the petrodollar. Okay, so we're getting into deep economics here, but the petrodollar can no longer exist in a 1.5 world. And so that is why it's not people debating whether a 1.5 or 2 or whatever the number is going to be. We have a fundamental realignment of the economic system. So that's what everybody's debating at the government level. And ultimately, if you're talking of vested interests, what are the most powerful vested interests in stopping this? And it's very simply, it's large corporates. Large corporates, if you look at world corporate profits, if you were to discount them at the correct cost of carbon, you would take up 80% to 90% of world corporate profits. So it's that. So that to me is what you have to do is you have to work the system. And we are moving to a new non-petrodollar. It will be a carbon type currency that won't be one currency only. And that's why 1.5 will be very difficult to get. But I was at a COP26 pre-meeting in London. John Kerry was there. I was privileged to be in a sort of antechamber hearing what's going on. I'm told by pretty senior advisors that they've got a chance. They've got a very decent chance, which was, I didn't go in with that impression.
Okay, so you've given what for many people is quite a radical and complicated answer here, Alistair. Let's just try and simplify this so that we all know that, you know, there's a price for oil, and that price for oil at the moment is $70 per ton. We know that in some countries oil can be produced quite cheaply, $10 or $15, and in other countries like the North Sea and fracking, it's much more expensive. So what are you really saying in terms of a price for carbon? Are you talking that there'll be a worldwide price for carbon which really dictates the world?
Yeah, I mean, my passion is carbon, and it's very interesting to have Mark on here. Mark, you know, almost, I guess, been here carbon markets for 25, 30 years, and that is certainly, you know, through no fault of Mark's, but it's 2 to 3 lost decades. Because, you know, I was in capital markets at those points, we didn't care about carbon markets. The banking world is obsessing about carbon markets. That's a positive thing. They're probably obsessing about how they make money out of carbon markets, but if they make money by correcting the world temperature, I think we can live with that in a capitalist society. I don't think we can change that concept. So I'm trying to amend that concept within. So to answer your question, the holy grail is to get a global carbon price that is aligned to 1.5 degrees. And I'll repeat that. So a global carbon price aligned to a 1.5 degree trajectory. Now, not many people talk about the second derivative of carbon price. Carbon price is generally a spot specific thing today. The most important thing is the term structure, the forward price of carbon. So if we have a term structure that says carbon should be, pick a number, $40, $50 per ton today, that's great. And some markets were close to it, others were not. But most importantly, to get to 1.5 degrees, we have to have 30-year carbon, somewhere between 200, 300, 400. So what we need to get out of COP26 is a commitment to 1.5. That's a number. Who cares? They'll pick a number. And it's the number that we need. That's irrelevant, which are the mechanisms that go after that. So let's make sure we have that number. And then very shortly thereafter, we work on a methodology that gets us a carbon aligned 1.5 Paris pathway.
Okay, so people are used to discussion about house prices going up over the years and an expectation for house prices going up. So what you're saying, Alistair, that to make this work, you've got not just the house price today, which is the carbon price today, but that the future prices of carbon need to be defined in the next few months in order that people can see a clear trajectory of prices for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the concept that this net zero that every corporate is talking about, and they're going net zero, countries are going net zero, it's very powerful, very dangerous. Net zero is net zero in carbon. And so that means that at some point, if they haven't reduced enough, and you obviously got to reduce before you offset, but then you offset. The critical element is the price that one offsets at. And the example I use is, so you'll pick a corporate, they have, say, 1 million tons of emission. That emission will cost society today $50 per ton. And they will go into the market, buy some hodgepodge offset for $2. They are carbon neutral in letter of the law. Great, well done. They can advertise they're carbon neutral. So they're not even greenwashing in that regard. They are societally taking $48 out of their pollution. So $48 is going on their balance sheet for profit, and $2 is going to plant some trees somewhere. So my big view is you're going to get a global carbon curve. And fortunately, I'm an insider here. I'm working with one of the big 4 accountancy firms, and we're looking at setting a fair value for carbon. I don't think we'll go to fair value straight away. But ultimately, if every company is looking at business as usual, they need to know where their offset points are over the next 10, 15, 20 years. And if you see that your business isn't profitable, guess what? You'll change it. Or you have to change it. So price is everything for me. I'm sorry to be so capitalist is the wrong word. I'm very passionate about nature, but that's the only way we can solve it. Okay,
well, amazing contribution, Alistair. So let's ask Mark. So Mark, you've got some experience in this area. So Mark, would you like to come in on this, and then we'll ask the others to contribute on this same question. So Mark, what's your point on this?
Well, to some extent, it would build on Alistair's a little bit. I think that, I suspect that there will be a huge amount of pressure in Glasgow to come up with a 1.5 commitment. I mean, that's easy. The much more challenging thing is what exactly are they committing to do to get to the 1.5? And it's worth pointing out that the new IPCC study, which does have a 1.5 scenario, they specifically say they're not looking at all at the feasibility of achieving those scenarios. That's for the later working group reports. That's not the role of the physical science report. The one interesting addition that I'll make to what Alistair has said is that what's really interesting is that the one area, or the area, where we've probably most fundamentally failed is in pricing the externality and pricing carbon. We haven't done it. And ironically, carbon markets, which are supposed to be a way of doing that, have undercut the whole idea of material carbon pricing, because we've been able to keep the price of carbon offsets and carbon markets so low that it totally eliminates the need for any transformational change. So, I would want to see leaders at the COP actually say, okay, rather than just saying, we're going to do this, what are they going to do? Because that's what's always missing.
Okay, so what are you want them at COP to say, what are these future carbon prices? Yeah.
Well, there's a strong argument to be made that the last 30 years of trying to come up with targets for emissions reductions was the wrong thing to do for all 30 years. And we should have been focusing, for example, on a globally coordinated carbon price. There have been books written about that. It's really never come up as a substantial topic of conversation. But if they came out and said, we're going to come up with a globally coordinated carbon price, that would be a huge step forward. They don't have to come up with what that number is, because it would be so terrifying that it would be dead on arrival. But they could at least commit to it and commit to that path. And that would be a sea change in how we're tackling this issue.
Magic. Okay, so Alistair, you've launched something here. It sounds as if Mark is agreeing. So let's give you a chance to come back, but let's have Alvin and Georgia's inputs on this. So Alvin, your take specifically on this point.
God, I'm really uncomfortable saying this in this room. The simple fact is we are not going to keep below 1.5 degrees centigrade. The IPCC report says that. If anyone claims that at COP26, they're lying. So I'll go through the physics. The physics of the climate system, even if we were to stop putting...
Well, hold on, Alvin, let's come on to that in a minute. But we've got a proposition here around the massive additional value of the world carbon price in the way that Alistair spoke about and Mark supported. So what do you think of that as a what do you think of that as a possibility?
I think it's very unlikely. It's very, very rare that we get an international agreement on a single price because there's so much vested interest. I'm sorry to be negative, but the reality is I don't think it will. However, I think what we will see and what will be very important is likely we'll start to see tariffs. And if those tariffs work through some of the larger countries, so if the EU imposes a carbon tariff of some kind, if China does or the US does, even if those tariffs are not the same and not identical, it immediately impacts countries like Australia, where we have a very carbon intensive industry. And it means that Australia is likely to be a laggard at Glasgow, almost certainly, because of the current government we have and the situation we're in at the moment. And it's been the case for the last 7 years under this Conservative government. Once you start to affect their exports and add costs that they hadn't counted in, they will start finding ways to reduce their carbon emissions and to actually start bringing in legislation that will counter that. Now, I would love to think that the world will come together and agree on a carbon price. That would be a beautiful thing. We had a carbon price in Australia very, very briefly for about a year and a half, and it worked. It worked really well. We actually saw a drop in our carbon dioxide emissions. So while I think it's a good idea, and I think it should go ahead, I actually think that world markets are more likely to price something in, governments will price in tariffs. I think it'll be in bits and pieces. So I think individual countries, individual entities will make moves in that direction because it makes good business sense. And a perfect example of this is when you look at superannuation investments in Australia, the largest returning superannuation investments at around 12% are investments into renewable technologies and green technologies. It's kind of them first and daylight second. So there's monetary value. There's some other things happening in Australia in the business community too, which I'm really hopeful about. But I think an international carbon price, yes, we should have one. The likelihood of it, I think, is very, very low.
Okay, thank you. Well, look, let's come back to talking in a minute about this question of tariffs, because people have heard about carbon pricing and that this relates more to tariffs. But first of all, Georgia, would you like to say something on the subject of the carbon price and carbon pricing?
Well, I mean, I completely agree. In a capitalist system, you've got to it's got to be about money. And the problem so far is that we have always asked corporates to do the right thing, and doing the right thing costs a lot of money. So you're essentially asking business to cut their own throats in order to keep carbon down, to protect nature, to protect people, acting against their own interests effectively. So you have to price carbon. And as soon as you do, businesses will see, you create a level playing field for all businesses by putting in place good governance and good regulation and carbon pricing, at which point you create a level playing field for everyone to compete, and business finds a way, and it does what it does best. It evolves and it finds a way of making a profit. But you have to create that level playing field. You have to price across all business, because if you don't, then you are going to get your cheap imports. You're going to effectively create a great business conditions for those who are doing the wrong thing, because doing the wrong thing is the best way to make a profit in our current system. So with the emissions trading scheme, which is the scheme which I am taking the government to court over, we see a situation where the UK government put in place effectively a carbon pricing scheme, but it put in place a scheme that the price was so low, it effectively just became a piece of bureaucracy. The price was far too low to change behaviour, and the cap was set, the emissions ceiling was set far higher, almost 20% higher than business as usual emissions, meaning that industry now has a green card to increase emissions. And that does not send a strong signal to industry that they must invest in decarbonisation. And it's going to take, on our current trajectory, 9 years before the carbon ceiling reaches current business as usual emissions levels. Now, the reason that happened was because of powerful corporate lobbying at government level, primarily by the oil and gas industry, who are the ones who stand to lose the most from a high carbon price, That's what we need to tackle. We have to break the hold that corporate lobbyists have on the government. We see it at COP, you know, this kind of insidious link between government and industry corporate vested interests. And until we find a way of breaking that, I cannot see that we're going to find a way of pricing carbon appropriately, which I think is the right thing to do.
Okay, thank you, Georgia. That's some great points about the ETS there. We've had some really interesting discussion. But let's put it back to Alistair to respond to so many of these comments. Yeah. Alistair, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. Very learned comments, and thank you, everybody. So I'm passionate about carbon. That's my life, carbon market. So very take in and absorb everything. We've all sort of waiting for the holy grail of governments to set. Right? Governments never set prices, never. Right? So capital markets always set prices. So forget what governments say. They tell us 1.5, and then it's up to us to act. There are two mechanisms that will make a global carbon price. And the first is accounting standards. And I'm on the inside track of that. So I think there will be accounting standards to fair value. Now, currently, as a CEO, if you lie about your balance sheet in profit terms, you go to jail. Okay? You can lie eye teeth about your carbon and you'll be accused of greenwashing. So that will change. So carbon will be part of your fiduciary responsibilities as a director of a company. So that has a massive impact. So what is the value they're going to charge for carbon? That will be the debate. What is the second act? Well, Georgia here already outlined litigation. That is going to be a massively powerful force. So once you have an implied fair value of carbon and companies aren't doing that, whether they're in the ETS scheme or not, is irrelevant. There'll be a social cost damage that they're leaving. So again, I'm working a solution that will be outlined at COP26. And it's for capital markets to step up. And it's got some of the biggest players in the world behind it potentially. So it's very, very exciting. It's got nothing to do with governments. They can do whatever they want. They'll set us a number, and we'll set, if they set us 1.5, we'll set a carbon price term structure. If they set us 2, we'll set a carbon price term structure. Forget governments. The capital markets have to solve this, and they've had vested interest not to solve it. We're tackling that head on, and I'm hopeful.
Wow. Okay. Well, look, let's try and draw a line now under that subject, because it's quite a complicated subject. And so let's get back to what people would like to say on the main subject here, which is how to get 1.5 max agreed at COP26, and what are going to be the arguments that really make a difference with the world leaders on this one. So who'd like to have a go at this one first? Georgia, would you like to have a go?
Gosh, okay, I'll have a go. We'll see where it gets us. I mean, I want to come back to She Changes Climate, which is, you know, we've talked about economics, but I agree, one of the comments that came up in the chat, you know, we need highly disruptive shifts in mindsets, behaviors, cultures, systems. We need diversity at the top. We cannot solve the problems that were created by the current system using only the mindsets and behaviors that got us to this place. We need diversity. And the UN Gender Action Plan that was agreed at COP25 that said that women had to be brought to the top table. They had to be brought in at all levels of climate action. That simply hasn't been done. When the UK announced their senior negotiating team last year, it was 100% male. Now, we've been meeting with Alok Sharma, we've been meeting with the Cabinet Office to try and change this. We've now got 3 women out of 12 on the team. You know, they're favourites, obviously, but, you know, we have to have diversity of thought and diversity of approach. You know, we simply have to have that. And that is not box ticking. It is bringing different perspectives, different approaches, different mechanisms to the table. And there are incredible women across the world who are campaigning on these issues, but they're simply shut out from the top table. And I think that is something that's not as complicated as mass economic change. It is something that really needs to be taken seriously. You know, the UN report said women's participation at the political level has resulted in greater responsiveness to citizens' needs, increasing cooperation across party and ethnic lines, and more sustainable peace. You know, that's in the introduction to the report. We need diversity of thought at the negotiating table. And I think in that way, we can start to see new systems, new approaches, ideas take hold that were not previously considered feasible or even brought to the table.
Super. Well, I have to say, Gary, you've seen the young people, that the young people we've had on these events, on these webinars that we've done, the young ladies of age 17 to 22 have been absolutely outstanding. And I think they've outnumbered the guys, haven't they, Gary?
I think you're right.
I wouldn't want to say they've been better speakers. That might be a bit radical, but some of the young ladies of this age have been quite extraordinary speakers in their ability to answer random questions from me with, you know, at least 9 out of 10. So I hope to welcome them back soon. So Alvin, you've got some points to make about, you know, maybe 1.5 not achievable. I mean, I was very much encouraged just now by Hans Lack, who's one of the audience, kindly referred me to the John Carey Kew Gardens interview. And that gave me a lot of encouragement that someone right at the top of the world on this is positive about this. But Alvin, over to you.
Okay, I'll deal with this one. The IPCC report explicitly says that we will not meet 1.5 without actually taking carbon back out of the atmosphere. And that is, from the IPCC, that is quite a statement. When 1.5 was first posited, probably only around 4 or 5 years ago, the climate scientists I was talking to at the time said there's just too much momentum already in terms of the physics of climate change. Even if we were to stop today, we would still get a continual build-up. But there's more than that. We also have an awful lot of carbon in our economies that will just come out over you can't just kind of remove it and disappear it. That carbon will still come out. And then you have the political will. And the reality is that at the lowest emissions rate, the IPCC says, as someone noted, we will at least clock over 1.6 and stay there and come back down. We're at the moment between 6 and 8.5, the two highest emission scenarios. We just went through COVID, and we saw a drop of 6.4% in our carbon emissions between 2019 and 2020. Now, if you have a look at there's some reports on this that essentially show that for us to stay under 1.5, we have to reduce our emissions year on year, 7% every single year. Now, we're just not doing that. And I also think that we have a real problem by setting a temperature target. 1.5 degrees is really quite meaningless. So my thought is this: when we go through 1.5 degrees centigrade, because I think it's inevitable, what will all the advocacy groups say then? Because they have they've attached themselves to this as being the important thing. And I guarantee there is no advocacy group out there thinking about what is our comms approach when we go through 1.5. I saw this exact same thing happen with Copenhagen when Copenhagen fell over. I will give you a very quick example. I was with WWF at the time. I had been invited to the meetings. The way these things work is they actually do the negotiations 6 or 7 months out. The leaders come in and sign something that's already been decided, and off they go. Now, it was really obvious, if you were following that, about 3 months out from Copenhagen, that they were not going to get what they hoped to get. And so I actually said in one of the meetings when we had all of the green groups in Australia together, I said, so what is our plan B if this doesn't come off? That was the last meeting I was invited to until afterwards, when I was suddenly invited to the meeting after Copenhagen and asked to chair it. But the problem was 2 green groups said, this climate change stuff, it's too hard, and dropped out altogether. Now, you have the School Strike for Climate, which is doing fantastic work in building bridges across generations, basing their campaign around 1.5. What do you tell them when we blow through 1.5? So to me, a temperature target is actually rather meaningless, because the IPCC doesn't even have an acceptable level of global, climate change and what it means. Okay, they don't really say what 2 degrees is or 1.5 degrees is, what it actually means in terms of impacts. It's very, very loose. But what we can measure really clearly is the trend in carbon emissions. We have the Keeling curve. We measure carbon dioxide and human-caused carbon dioxide in the atmosphere every year. Now, if we start aiming towards flattening the curve, does it sound similar? Then we have something that's target. And every time we lower that trend, we have a win. And when you start winning regularly, you get more support. We never during COVID said, oh, we don't want any more than 150 people dying a day. We said, flatten the curve and then drop the curve. This is exactly the same approach we need to take with climate change. So I'm really uncomfortable with using a 1.5 degree target because A, we won't hit it. We're pretty close to 2. If we meet our Paris agreements, all of them, that's 3.2 degrees centigrade. So, these are serious numbers, and we're focusing on these abstract numbers when in fact emissions are what the game is all about, nothing else. They need to lower that trend, flatten it, and drop it. And that's where I think we should be focused. So that's just my take on it. Sorry, I'm quite passionate.
Okay, Alvin, that's a really great point you've made about this level of CO2 emissions. I mean, I found this a few years ago. So if people aren't familiar with it, CO2 is measured at Mauna Loa in Hawaii. It's in the middle of nowhere, so it's not influenced by CO2 emissions from industry and stuff. And so that's been measured. And when I found that, just a little bit of complexity with that is that it actually changes by the month. So what you have to look at the May figures, because the May figures, for whatever reason, are the maximum for the world. So if you look at the May figures and look at the trend, totally agree that this is an absolutely objective measure. Now, for whatever reason, the world hasn't gone down that route. I think that for me, the negotiations at COP26 are going to be about temperature. And if they are going to be about temperature, then what's been put here in the chat by Stefan and what's been talked about here, then the situation is that the best possible is 1.6, bringing it back down to 1.5. I mean, my take with this is that the point when you fail with an activity, with climbing Everest or whatever it is, the point when you fail is the point when you turn back. Okay, you can walk slower, you can progress slower at times because of the problems. But for me, we can't afford to turn back on this. For me, it's critically important that 1.5 is the figure that gives the best result for the world. And I mean, arguably, world leaders can be in deep trouble for having agreed stuff at Paris, which they blatantly haven't delivered on. I think for me, far better is that we go for the 1.5, set that as a target, accept the fact that it's going to be pulled back, and use the 2030 interim targets of cutting CO2 by very large amounts in the US, in Europe, in the UK figures as well for 2035. Use this to basically pin down the achievements of what's actually been achieved. But anyway, that's my soapbox on this one. So let's get back to the subject. Now, I think, Mark, is it your turn to talk about what you think about what needs to be done on 1.5? What do you want to say, Mark?
Sure. I mean, first, I actually agree with all of Alvin's points. I think, I do think that focusing on the numbers is actually a real problem, but that's where we are, and that's what's going to happen at the COP. I wanted to come back, though, to sort of clarify something between Georgia and Alistair, in the sense that, Georgia said governments need to act, and then if there's a price, businesses will react to that price, and that's how we move forward. And Alistair said, forget government. I don't think I'm paraphrasing. Don't worry about government. Doesn't matter what government says. The business community will internalize the externality and solve this. And it's a fascinating distinction between the two, because I think that the one thing, in addition to the IPCC report, the other thing that would really make governments act on this is if there were real business pressure to act. And there isn't real business pressure to act. Even as companies are setting net zero targets and all sorts of stuff, they're not putting political pressure to act here in the US or in a lot of places. And I have to say, having been tracking and studying this issue for decades, I have never found a convincing argument that business can step in and tackle this on its own. I've just never found anything that suggests that. And Alistair, please email me the answer to that question.
Yeah, absolutely. Do I jump in here, Charles?
Gary, I think we're going to run over a little bit because we've got such interesting discussion here. So one of the questions I'd like to ask you, Mark, is that the at the Paris, when the Paris Agreement was done, I think I'm right in saying that there was a pre-discussion, a very, very important pre-discussion between the US and China, which led the way to the Paris Agreement. Now, obviously, John Kerry's the man here. There's been discussion around this wonderful phrase of compartmentalization, which is the separation of issues to do with climate from other issues between any countries. And John Kerry talked about this in the Q interview. Just wondering what your perspective is on this. Is there a possibility of John Kerry doing some sort of pre-discussion, pre-deal with China to smooth the way for COP26?
Well, from the statement, the China-US statement prior to the G7, or I think prior to the G7, I mean, it was very run of the mill. We're going to work together to support this. We're going to work together to decarbonize. All the standard stuff. But no real indication of some fundamental change in policy between the two. I think the idea of compartmentalization, that let's all agree that climate change is the most important issue and put all of our other differences aside while we solve climate change. I mean, it sounds great, but it's very hard to see how it actually works. And I don't think we've seen any real successful examples of being able to do that, because there's always other stuff that comes up and stirs the pot and creates problems. I mean, just in the last 2 days, we've had Afghanistan fall, and we've had Haiti get knocked over by another earthquake, and that's going to create all sorts of things going on, all of which makes it even harder to focus with a singular focus on climate change.
Okay, so Alvin, similar question to yourself. Obviously, Australia is in a little bit of a unique situation here. In the UK, we get, for example, the Guardian newspaper has very good coverage of Australia on climate with their correspondence and things. So we get regular features about Australia. So coming back to this question of what might make a difference in Australia around to getting decisions on climate. So the way you see it, what might be the key factors that would influence the Australia government to fall in behind something in November?
I think it's actually the thing that is behind all powerful advocacy, and that is multiple voices. And we have a really good example of that, where sometimes what tends to happen in advocacy circles is that we start off by going, these people over here are my enemies, and these are my friends, and I'm going to throw grenades at my enemies. And yet often it's a case when you get multiple unexpected voices together that things start to work. Now, in Australia, we've actually had some very interesting moves by business. So we're seeing insurance companies and banks with assets really starting to put pressure on the government about doing something around climate change. We're seeing the Australian Stock Exchange demand climate risk reporting from every single company on the stock exchange. But to me, the most profound win of all has been against what was going to be the world's largest coal mine, by Port Adani. It's just changed another name at the moment. Now, that was a really interesting one, because we had farmers come together, we had green activists come together, we had businesses come together, we even had a group called the Knitting Grannies come together. And they all basically, from a whole lot of different angles with different voices, all wanted the same thing. The consequence has been that any company that requires a social license to act, it turned into such a cause célèbre in this country that no bank in Australia will fund Adani mine. They've had to go outside of Australia to get any funding. They can't build a railway line that they need at the moment to get the coal to port anyway. And so what's happened is all of these different voices have come together. They put the pressure on the corporations and on the politicians. So the politicians have still gone ahead and said, yes, you can build this coal mine, but they can't get the funding for it. The secret, every single piece of incredibly successful advocacy that I have ever seen is unusual voices, so unusual allies together, multiple voices, all saying the same thing. Every single time I've seen a win, that has been one of the foundation stones. So I think if that you want to advocate in a powerful way and get success, find every demographic, find every part of society and bring them all together with a common voice. And that's when things will get done. Even in our case, if the government wants it to get done, we can still stop it. So I think that's the way that you move.
Okay, well, we're heading towards the end, so let's give the opportunity for one or two final comments before we get in the final questions. So, is anybody else dying to say something on this topic?
Maybe I'll just throw in, maybe it sort of builds on what Alvin stated, and maybe answers Mark's question as well. You know, I'm not the die-hard capitalist, and only markets can work, right? The answer is all of the above. You know, to me, there is no one single solution, but there is. And the one single solution is a market solution. It has to be a market solution. And that can only happen with carbon that's effectively priced. Going back to whether we announce 1.5 or not, I think it's critical that we announce 1.5, because that we're looking at building a carbon curve based off a price difference. Whether we hit it or not, who cares? But if we have a price curve that then gets put into, and then to answer Mark's question, governments, corporates, markets, somewhere in between, you need macroprudential regulation. And that's governments saying you have to. The reason why I say markets are stronger than governments is, you know, governments have to agree at 150 levels. If you've got the major corporates being told to do something by an accounting standard, that is 100 times more powerful than any government can be. But it needs to be an accounting standard. If they don't do, the CEO goes to jail. So, and that to me is above any government. So that's why I see the power of markets. We got into this problem because of market price. We need to get out of it with market price. It is that simple. Now, the way that to answer Alvin's and to back up Alvin, you know, litigation, people coming together, brilliant. You know, macroprudential, that's government setting a framework. People power, Extinction Rebellion, all part of the part, and society as well. And that will then lead to the market solution. You know, you can't have a voluntary solution to an existential threat when 80% of world corporate profit, it's not going to be wiped out, but it's going to be reallocated. This is a changing of an empire, basically from the West to basically a more global allocation of resource. You know, the rainforest, they sequester a gigaton of carbon a year. Are they going to get paid for it? They will in the new world. They don't currently.
So, I mean, there's so much here in what you say, Alistair. This reallocation from the West to getting value from nature-based solutions. I mean, there are so many countries which at the moment are struggling, you know, across the world in places where they could use the money for the nature-based solutions and would make a real difference, and they can't do that. I mean, if you think of someone like Mozambique, what could they do with money for nature-based solutions? It might well mean that they don't actually have to proceed with the gas field that they're doing with Total, things like that. So just one more point then, and I'll come on to a final question. So anybody else like to say anything before we move on to the final question? Okay, so final question then. So we've got this really, really important situation at COP26 where decisions are going to be made for the world. It's potentially a do or die situation. Last chance, we've been talking about it for the last hour. So let's just think, I'm borrowing from Gary here, the magic wand, okay? So if you had a magic wand, what would be your wish for COP26 and why? And I'll just kick this off to give you a little bit of extra, few seconds of thinking about it. So mine would be, is to go for 1.5 maximum, and for countries to agree this, because I'd want them to believe that it's the right thing to do for the world, for the planet. And the reason for doing it is, as I've said earlier, is because it will actually focus, I believe it will really focus the world, the decision makers, the businesses, everybody. It will actually focus people on actually doing it. So who'd like to go first in response to that?
Georgia.
I'll go. Yeah, I'm happy to go. My magic wand. I would like individuals who care about this to really think about their sphere of influence, because I think we're all taught that the important thing for us is, buying an electric vehicle or turning down the thermostat, or, not throwing away plastic bottles. Yeah, that's fine, but it's really virtue signaling. That is not your greatest influence as an individual. Your influence is as a voter, as a consumer of brands, as somebody on social media, as a communicator. And I think that I would like to wave a magic wand, and I would like to get all people who care about this issue to stand up, to become a member of Extinction Rebellion, which I am. I'm an activist. I'm out now. I'm also a consultant in industry, so I've had to square that. And my clients, when there's an Extinction Rebellion uprising, call me and say, "Oh, don't get arrested." But it's important. I care about these things, and I think there are so many people who either don't care about it or don't understand it. We don't have time for 8 billion people to wake up and understand the difference between, is it better to recycle a plastic bottle or to take a reusable one with me? It's complicated. We don't have time for people to learn that stuff. What we need is for markets and governments to sort out this stuff so that the stuff that we buy, the products and services that we purchase and use, are automatically the right thing for the planet. We need to stand up. We need to take to the streets. We need to demand different behavior from our leaders. We need to contact the brands that we purchase from and demand that they act as well. And, from what Alvin, Alistair, Mark, or everyone has been saying, I want individuals to understand the power that they have as a citizen, and to not be shy, to not think that those are just crusty hippies on the street who are making a nuisance of themselves. This is us. This is our planet. These are our lives. We have to start coming together and taking a stand and demanding better.
Very passionate. Thank you, Georgia. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, who's next? Mark.
Well, because I'll build on Georgia's thing a little bit. I think, I agree completely with the sentiment. I think we've got a fundamental problem because people, here in the US, 100 million people are concerned or alarmed about climate change. I estimate that 343 know, what to do, how to be most effective at tackling climate change. 343 out of 100 million is not a great proportion. And so it's fine to say we should all do these things, which we should, but people need help in understanding what it is they could do at any given moment in time. Where is it that, given their resources, their education, whatever, their time, whatever it is they have to give, how could that be most effectively deployed at any given time to accomplish things on the climate chessboard, which is the metaphor that we use. And that we ought to be using artificial intelligence for that. We ought to be matching people to opportunities. None of that is happening. And so even as we talk about this existential risk, we have hundreds of millions of people who literally have no idea how to help. And I wish my magic wand would be setting up the organization, setting up the war room, so to speak, that would help people actually exert their influence and their power, as George is talking about.
Wow, super. Thank you. Alvin?
Sure, you caught me. Since we're talking magic wands, my magic wand thing would be really quite simple. And that is that the magic wand forces the politicians at COP26 to tell the truth when they set a target, to make sure that they also take the actions that will lead to that target. And the example of where that didn't happen is Paris. They set a target of 1.5 and their actions were for 3.2 degrees centigrade. So as a quiet little warning, I would always also suggest that after COP26, have a very good look at the target they've set and the promises they've made, and see if they equal or don't equal. My magic wand would make them equal.
Magic. That's a terrific point. Thank you, Alvin. Alistair.
Yeah, my magic wand is be very vested interest here, self-interest, but I'm working on a project to launch at COP26. And it would be for a 100 billion fund. And the fund is to save the rainforests. And by virtue of saving the rainforest, you save 1 gigaton of CO2 sequestration every year. And that fund will develop its own global carbon curve. You don't need governments to do it if you have 100 billion behind it. And that's the project we're working on. And there'll be press releases on that in the next few weeks, but that will be my magic wand.
Well, very best of luck with that. Okay, so after that, maybe we don't need a summary, but would anybody give anybody the opportunity to summarize their position or what they're doing or whatever? Would anyone take the opportunity to summarize? Okay, if nobody wants to summarize, then I'll just summarize myself. So thank you so much to everybody. It's been an amazing discussion. Apologies to people if it was a little bit complex and technical, but this is the benefit of the replays that Gary organizes for us. So you can replay the whole thing multiple times particularly on YouTube, but also on Facebook, and you can share it with other people that you want to inform about the amazing insights that we've had today. So do please do that. Apart from running these webinars, as I said, my other activity to help the world is to try and make it easy for people to do something about it by planting trees. Totally agree with the panel here that the first thing to do is to cut your CO2 emissions. But the big benefit of planting trees is actually to give us more time, because those trees growing for 20, 30, 40, 50 years will really help us to give us some more time in this critical situation to remove CO2 emissions. For example, governments could decide to remove a government for a country could decide to remove its CO2 emissions related to air travel for all air travel in and out of that country and just plant trillions of trees. So for today, as I say, this is a volunteer activity. Everyone's volunteered their time and effort. And we've had to pay Gary for the to run this thing. So if people would like to contribute to plant some trees, for £20 donation, we will plant 180 trees. For £30, we'll plant 270 trees, which will create paid work for people in extreme poverty. So thank you very, very much, everybody. Thank you for listening. And if people aren't connected to us, do please connect with us on LinkedIn. This is a great way to share activity. So thank you very much. And we look forward to seeing you again at a future
Charles,
event.
we should thank you as well for coordinating all of this.
Absolutely.
From a non-academic point of view, we could just increase a little bit of urgency. That would certainly be great, as well as all the education. If you're watching this, please like, share, comment, share it around, and contact Charles. He's thought of a very clever idea of getting unemployed people into employment and a contribution to no CO2. So have a chat with him. Everyone, have a lovely, safe day.
Super. Thanks, everyone.